we would still have sort of, we don't have to. We would still have, so we could change, say, this is food, and this is clothing for some individual. We have his production possibilities, so we could change his preferences. For example, we could change it around in different forms, but the general results that he or she chooses, the specialization options, would remain. So it would change market clearing points. Yep.
Okay. My second question has to do with your quota price ratio method and the quota price difference ratio method.
Mm-hmm.
So these are allocation rules
Yes.
that when I look at them, I think, well, that looks like the solution to some first order condition. Because you've got ratios of shares and things that look like marginal values, and then something that looks like a constraint floating around. So my question to you is, what's the behavioral model, the economic behavior that underlies both of these models?
Okay. I'd like to draw, but they didn't give us this fun. The underlying behavioral model is the demand for quota, basically. And I have to make sort of a compromise there. So if we imagine two provinces, say A and B. Okay, thanks. No, make it bigger. So province A and province B. So let's see, this is the, and this is the quantity, let's say price. So this is quantity of quota demanded, say in one province, and say in the other. Now I make some assumptions of the elasticities and everything else. So we have some observations here on the curves. We have the current quantity and the current price. So we see that this province has a lower price. So let's say we want to increase the total national quota, which is the sum of these two, by some quantity. So what we would think would start happening is that these people would start bidding for that additional quota, and then at some point we would satisfy that, and then these people would start bidding for the quota, depending on how large this quantity is. Now, what could happen here is if this additional quota is very small, and if these price differences, depending on elasticities too, are large, we could actually end up with the whole thing ending up in one province if we just gave it for auction. But in the allocation method, I took that as a, let's say, one extreme possibility of the quota price difference method, where we could take not the lowest price, but second lowest, third lowest up to, and so we could do those calculations. So this is the underlying model.
So get me from that to the ratios of the shares being equal to the ratio of quota values.
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say that I would go that far to be equal to the ratios of quota prices.
That's what the equation says.
Okay, so what the equations are attempting to do is to follow that general principle that higher quota prices would tend to result in higher quota shares. Now, I don't go into specifics how correct these shares are, but I'm trying to follow this general principle where higher quota prices result in proportional with higher quota shares. So I would see it as a sort of a proposal to decision-making body. If you would like to implement the comparative advantage principle to some degree, this is how you could do it. Now you can choose between these different options depending on all other concerns that they may have. So I didn't come up with the ratio based on some exact underlying optimization model. The ratio is just one variation of, let's say, monotonic transformation of quota price rankings into another rank. So let's say we know there's an infinite number of transformations of these rankings, and I picked two, as two extremes between which they could choose.
Okay, that's all.
All right, thanks, John. Glenn?
Yeah, Predrag, congratulations on your presentation this morning. I thought it was excellent. I really enjoyed it. Some of my questions have already been answered, but let me just ask a couple of sort of narrow technical questions at this point. You make several references in your thesis to Hayek's 1945 essay on the problem of knowledge in society. In that essay, Hayek uses a phrase, something like the marvel of the price system. Mm-hmm. Why does he call it a marvel? And how does the marvel work?
I guess his metaphor was that it reflects something that is marvel is something nice or something good. So his value judgment of the price system is, I think, very high. And what I see what he means there is that this is a system that is sort of in his essay sort of works like magic. He didn't really go into more detailed mechanics or more detailed logical analysis how the system works, but he sees that this price system reflects some unobservable characteristics of individuals that then, and these characteristics are time and place specific, so giving people freedom to make choices based on their individual knowledge creates these prices that then reflect that knowledge to others. So he sees that as a marvel of information transmission within the society, information that is not directly observable by others. And I think that the further unpacking of this marvel is done by a later 1992 paper by Barnett, where he talks about how these prices originate and what they actually mean, voluntary exchanges of jurisdiction over different objects or different resources, so that the fact that they're consensual and voluntary, he explains why that is important in reflecting this unobservable information. So the marvel likeness of the system is sort of less magical and more rational there. So I think what he means by the marvel is that it's in his view it's a great accomplishment. In his view, maybe even coincidental, that we ended up using the price system for coordinating actions of producers and consumers and everybody in the economy, but without which our society would be very likely much different than it is now, because activities and actions need to be organized. So if they're not organized in this spontaneous way, then they would be likely organized in some other more rigid way.
Okay, thanks. The other question has to do with the analysis that you do with your model in Chapter 4. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to have you compare your analysis of the effects of liability in Chapter 4 with the Coase theorem. Are you saying the same thing, or are you saying something different from the Coase theorem?
So the real Coase theorem, or the Coase theorem that people quote as Coase theorem?
Let's talk about the one that people quote as the Coase theorem.
Okay, so the often quoted theorem is that in the absence of transaction costs, it doesn't matter to whom you allocate ownership, people are going to find ways, because there's no reason not to find ways when transaction costs are zero, to allocate them in a way that internalizes externalities. So there is no need for any additional intervention. Now, in one of the scenarios, and that's the first scenario, that's the most, what I call the most unrealistic, because everybody knows everything about everybody else, everything that they need to know to make the evaluations of the products that they're consuming. So in that sense, I think there is a connection there in this ideal world where, for example, you are buying, say you're buying a coffee, and you know who produced every grain of coffee that was in that coffee, who produced the paper, and how. You know everything about those people, and you know how it was produced, how many molecules of whatever pollutant came out, and where they ended up, and whether they ended up, say, affecting you, and how they affected you. And then you make your evaluation based on that. And since pollution is global, every product affected you in some way, and then you make your evaluation. One thing that is different is that Coase uses sort of a utilitarian approach where he equates, or he compares one person's gains and another person's losses in terms of money or income. Here, individuals, when they make their decisions, it's pretty much up to them how much they value the fact that that product didn't affect them at all, or did. So they could simply refuse to buy it at any price of any market. So that's the sort of a parallel difference.
Good, thanks. One of the difficulties in being the advisor at the defense is I've asked all my good questions in the advising process, so that's all I've got for the first round.
All right, thanks. Predrag, how are you doing?
Good.
Yeah? Okay. Well, then we'll just keep going then. So, Peter, next round. To you.
Me?
Yep. Yes.
Is asking me?
Yeah, Peter, it's up to you. Next round.
Okay, so I wanted to push back a little bit on this policy, implications, because if you look at your first page of slides that I have after your title slide, right? You talk about the motivation being the Canadian Farm Products, Agency Act, right? And it's dictating that we're going to now use comparative advantage to be the thing that drives this. And then your analysis shows that part of the market process idea is that outside of the market process itself, the knowledge of the comparative advantages simply don't exist. So as a tool of policy guidance, right, it's actually quite difficult. It actually goes back to Glenn's question about the coast